crazy change in my life.
That was in the first few weeks of it opening. Yeah, because that's where it opened.
Yeah.
What if I told you that one of the most beloved Western stars of the early 1970s came from 4 generations of doctors, nearly became a physician himself, and only turned to acting after a near-fatal car crash, scrambled his brain, and changed his personality forever? What if I told you that the studio resumed filming his hit show just 12 hours after his death, paged his replacement off an airplane, and fitted that man into the dead star's costume the very next morning? And what if I told you that 50 years later, Quentin Tarantino watched the footage of this forgotten actor and used his tragic story as the blueprint for Leonardo DiCaprio's most acclaimed role? This is the story of Pete Duel, a man who fought Hollywood, fought his own mind, and lost both battles on the last night of 1971. But before the bullet, before the Christmas tree, before the telegram he shot off his own wall, there were 10 moments that built the legend and sealed the fate of television's most tormented cowboy. And it began in the last place you'd expect to find a future outlaw. Number 1. Born into the wrong dynasty. Peter Elstrom Duel arrived on February 24, 1940, in Rochester, New York, the firstborn son of Dr. Ellsworth Duel and Lillian Elstrom, a nurse of Swedish-American heritage. The family lived in Penfield, a quiet suburb where the Duel home at 1790 Penfield Road doubled as his father's medical office. Pete's grandfather was a doctor. His great-grandfather was a doctor. 2 of his cousins would become doctors. The Duel family had been healing people for over a century, and there was exactly one path expected of young Peter. But Pete had other plans simmering behind those sharp blue eyes. By age 5, he could identify military aircraft by their silhouettes alone. He wanted to fly. He wanted adventure. He wanted anything that wasn't a stethoscope and a waiting room. At 17, he walked into an Air Force recruiting office, ready to sign his life away, and the recruiter looked at his medical chart, noted his 20/30 eyesight, and sent him home. The sky was closed. He enrolled at St. Lawrence University in the fall of 1957, his father's alma mater, on a pre-med track. But Pete Duel wasn't built for organic chemistry. He was built for the stage. He joined the drama department and starred in Tennessee Williams's The Rose Tattoo with such raw intensity that his father, the doctor who wanted a doctor for a son, watched from the audience and gave Pete his blessing to leave school and chase acting. That single performance changed the trajectory of an entire family dynasty. But would acting give Pete the meaning he was searching for, or would it become its own kind of trap? Number 2. The crash that rewired everything. Over Christmas break in 1957, Pete and a friend were driving through upstate New York when a snowstorm turned a country road into a death trap. Their car slammed head-on into another vehicle, and Pete was hurled through the passenger side windshield. Glass shredded his face. His tongue was nearly severed. Bleeding from his skull, he spent roughly a month in the hospital while doctors repaired the damage. But the damage they couldn't see was the damage that mattered most. The impact caused bleeding deep inside his brain, and scar tissue formed in areas that would later trigger seizures. Pete Duel, at 17 years old, developed epilepsy. Doctors prescribed phenobarbital and Dilantin, 2 powerful anticonvulsant drugs that Pete tolerated poorly and took irregularly for the rest of his life. Here is the detail that haunts this entire story. Dilantin, the drug prescribed to control his seizures, has since been linked to depression, mood instability, and suicidal ideation. Some researchers believe the medication meant to save Pete's brain may have slowly poisoned his mind. He never talked about the crash publicly. He never used it as an excuse, but everyone who knew him noticed a shift. The carefree kid from Penfield became a young man who carried something heavy behind his smile. Was it the epilepsy? Was it the drugs? Or was it something that had always been there, waiting for a windshield to crack it open? Number 3. Starving for the stage. Around 1960, Pete packed everything he owned and moved to New York City. He had no money, no connections, and no backup plan. He rented a room at the IMCA and cleaned hallways and bathrooms to cover the rent. Every spare hour went into his training at the American Theater Wing, where he studied Shakespeare, Restoration comedy, fencing, dancing, and body movement for 2 grueling years. His first paid acting job came in 1962, a small role in an off-Broadway production of Elektra at the Players Theatre in Greenwich Village, where he also worked as the assistant stage manager because the paycheck from acting alone couldn't feed him. Then he landed a spot in the national touring company of the Broadway comedy Take Her, She's Mine, starring Tom Ewell. When the tour reached Los Angeles in 1963, Pete made a decision that would define his career. He stayed, but he gave himself a private deadline: 5 years. He would give Hollywood exactly 5 years to prove it deserved him. After that, he was going back to New York, back to the stage, back to the kind of acting that actually meant something. He told almost no one about this deadline, but the clock was already ticking, and Hollywood had a very different timeline in mind. Could Pete master the game before his own deadline ran out? Number 4. The teen idol who hated being one. Pete's television career ignited on September 15, 1965, when ABC premiered Gidget and introduced America to 2 future stars in the same frame. Sally Field played the title character. Pete played John Cooper, Gidget's stuffy, psychology-spouting brother-in-law. He appeared in roughly 22 of the show's 32 episodes, and despite the lightweight material, his natural charisma burned through every scene. ABC canceled Gidget after 1 season, but Pete barely had time to catch his breath. He was immediately cast as the lead in Love on a Rooftop, a romantic comedy about newlyweds living in a tiny apartment opposite Judy Carn. He appeared in all 30 episodes. The show earned strong reviews, and Pete was named Most Promising Male Star of 1966 by Quigley Publications. But ABC killed that show too after 1 season, and Pete publicly blamed the network, claiming another producer had muscled him out of the time slot. In July 1967, Universal Studios signed Pete to a 7-year exclusive contract. Guest spots piled up on The Virginian, Ironside, Marcus Welby, and a dozen other shows. He made his film debut in The Hell with Heroes in 1968. He starred in the comedy Generation with David Janssen in 1969 and filmed the western Cannon for Cordoba in Spain in 1970. On paper, Pete Duel was a rising star with a major studio behind him. But behind closed doors, he was miserable. The 5-year deadline he had set for himself was approaching. Broadway felt further away than ever, and the roles Hollywood kept offering him were exactly the kind of lightweight, forgettable parts he had come to Los Angeles to escape. Was Pete climbing the ladder, or was the ladder leaning against the wrong wall entirely? Number 5. The Outlaw Who Became a Prisoner. In January 1971, ABC debuted Alias, Smith & Jones, a Western adventure series inspired by the 1969 blockbuster Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The premise was irresistible. 2 charming outlaws, Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry, are secretly offered amnesty by the governor, but only if they can stay out of trouble for a full year while the rest of the world still thinks they're wanted men. Pete was cast as Hannibal Hayes, the silver-tongued brains of the operation. Ben Murphy, a fellow Universal contract player who reminded executives of a young Paul Newman, won the role of Kid Curry. The chemistry between them was instant. Murphy later described it as blind luck. "We never had a discussion about acting or how we were going to play a certain scene," he said. "Ours was an effortless chemistry, a natural progression. It was like one of those marriages that goes on, and neither party has to talk about it. We just did it." The show was a hit with young audiences, especially teenage girls, who pinned Pete's face to their bedroom walls. Fan magazines couldn't get enough of him. But the show faced brutal competition. NBC's top-rated Flip Wilson show in the first 2 seasons, then CBS's juggernaut All in the Family when ABC moved it to Saturdays. Alias, Smith & Jones never cracked the Nielsen Top 30, and Pete took every sinking rating personally. He told the Los Angeles Times in late 1971 words that would become his epitaph. "That series, this series, any series, is a big fat drag to an actor who has any interest in his work. It's the ultimate trap. You slowly lose any artistic thing you may have. It's utterly destructive." He added, with the bitterness of a man who had counted every day since his 5-year deadline passed. "Contractually, I have to do this series. or some other trash. But if Pete hated the trap so much, why couldn't he find a way to break free? Number 6. The demons he couldn't outrun. Pete Duel was an alcoholic, not the charming, functional kind that Hollywood loves to romanticize, but the kind who crashed cars and hurt innocent people. On October 24, 1970, Pete caused a serious automobile accident in Hollywood that injured 2 people. He was arrested for drunk driving and hit and run. The hit and run charge was eventually dismissed, but on June 21, 1971, he pleaded guilty to DUI before a Santa Monica court. The judge fined him $1,000, suspended his sentence, and revoked his driver's license. In a letter to the court, Pete wrote 9 words that revealed everything. "I am searching hard for a meaningful life outside of my work." He promised the judge he would stop drinking. He attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. But the promise didn't hold. The depression that had shadowed him since the windshield crash in 1957 was deepening. Colleagues noticed wild mood swings. Some days Pete was electric, laughing, reciting Shakespeare at dawn. Other days, he barely spoke. His business manager, John Napier, remembered a summer night when he found Pete standing barefoot in blue jeans outside his home at 4 in the morning, reciting Hamlet in a loud, strong, beautiful voice as the sun rose, then screaming at the sky, "I love you, son." Producer Joe Swirling observed the same pendulum. On certain days, he'd be very up and upbeat and kind of manic. And on other days, he'd be very intense. I always got the sense that he took these things personally, and that he was frustrated that he couldn't do enough to help solve the problems of the world. In August 1971, Pete collapsed on set from sheer exhaustion and was carried off the lot by studio ambulance. He was an environmentalist who refused non-recyclable containers. He was a political activist who had campaigned for Eugene McCarthy in 1968 and witnessed police brutality at the Chicago Democratic Convention. He carried every cause, every injustice, every disappointment in the world on his shoulders, as if they were personally his fault. And the weight was becoming impossible to bear. How long could one man carry the world before something inside him finally snapped? Number 7. The women who tried to save him. Pete Duel never married, but the women in his life tried desperately to reach the man behind the charm. Sally Field, his Gidget co-star, adored him. She later said he treated her like a big brother, which she hated because her feelings ran deeper. Judy Carney, from Love on a Rooftop, had a brief relationship with him. He dated actress Jill Andre, an older woman with 2 children he loved, as if they were his own. But the relationship that nearly saved him was with actress Kim Darby, whom he met filming Generation in 1969. Pete wanted to marry her. He was certain she was the answer. Then Darby abruptly left him to marry actor James Westmoreland, a marriage that lasted barely 2 months. Pete was devastated. The press covered the breakup like gossip, and he felt humiliated in front of the industry he already resented. His final relationship was with Diane Ray, an aspiring actress and secretary he met on the set of The Psychiatrist. She quit her job to be with him and moved into his Hollywood Hills bungalow. Pete credited her with pulling him out of a near-agoraphobic depression. "I was a basket case when I first met her," he said. "Then Diane moved me out, and I saw the sun for what seemed like the first time in years. But even Diane couldn't stop what was coming. She could bring him into the sunlight, but she couldn't keep the darkness from following them back inside. And in the final weeks of 1971, the darkness was moving faster than either of them could run." What happens when the one person keeping you alive can't reach you anymore? Number 8. The telegram he shot off the wall. In November 1971, Pete Duel ran an independent campaign for a seat on the Screen Actors Guild Board of Directors. He wasn't doing it for prestige. He was doing it because he believed the union needed to fight harder for better working conditions, for actors trapped in the television grind. He campaigned with the same intensity he brought to everything: ecology, politics, acting, and he lost. A telegram arrived at his Hollywood Hills bungalow informing him of the defeat. Pete read it. Then he noticed something that bothered him. The telegram didn't have a period at the end of its last sentence. He pinned the telegram to his living room wall, pulled out his .38 caliber revolver, and fired a bullet into it. Then he turned to whoever was present and said he had put a period into it and made his loss official. Everyone laughed. It was classic Pete, dramatic, funny, a little dangerous, but ultimately harmless. Nobody asked the obvious question. Why did Pete Duel own a loaded .38 caliber revolver? He was an ardent environmentalist, a man who wept over vanishing forests and refused to use disposable cups. A gun was the last thing anyone expected to find in his home. Nobody asked because nobody wanted to hear the answer. That bullet hole in the wall would later become the most important piece of evidence in Pete's death investigation. But in November 1971, it was just a joke. Just Pete being Pete. And the revolver went back into its resting place. How many warning signs have to appear before someone finally says the words out loud? Number 9. The last night of 1971. On Thursday, December 30th, 1971, Pete Duel arrived on the set of Alias Smith & Jones in high spirits. Crew members later said he seemed upbeat, even happy. His driver's license was still suspended from the DUI conviction, so a studio driver brought him home that evening to his rented two-bedroom bungalow at 2552 Glen Green Terrace in the Hollywood Hills. That night, with Diane Ray beside him, Pete watched an episode of his own show. He hated it. He called it trash, the same word he had used with the Los Angeles Times just weeks earlier. Then he switched to a Los Angeles Lakers basketball game and drank. He drank heavily. An autopsy would later reveal a dangerously high blood alcohol level. Sometime after Diane went to bed, Pete entered the bedroom. He was unclothed. He walked to the dresser and retrieved a package. Diane thought it might be a forgotten Christmas present. Inside was the same .38 caliber revolver that had put a period into his SAG telegram. Pete looked at the woman who had pulled him out of the darkness and said 5 words. "I'll see you later." He walked into the living room. Around 1:30 in the morning on December 31st, 1971, Diane heard what sounded like a firecracker. She found Pete's body slumped beneath the Christmas tree, blood at his right temple, the bullet having passed through his head and shattered the front window. She called his brother Jeffrey. Then she called the police. Pete Duel was 31 years old. His 5-year deadline had passed 6 years ago. He never made it back to Broadway. He never escaped the trap. And the last thing he watched on television was a show he despised, wearing a smile he couldn't feel. But what happened next would prove that Hollywood's cruelty didn't end with the bullet. Number 10. 12 hours and a dead man's costume. Detective Sergeant Paul Estrada examined the scene and noted the muzzle had been pressed less than an inch from Pete's head. Investigators initially suspected foul play. The gun had been fired twice, but the second shot was traced to the telegram incident weeks earlier. Diane Ray passed a polygraph test. The death was ruled a probable suicide. Executive producer Joe Swirling wanted to halt production of Alias Smith & Jones. ABC's response was immediate and merciless. According to multiple accounts, the network told Universal, "No way. You have a contract to deliver this show to us, and you will continue to deliver the show as best you can on schedule, or we will sue you." The entire production company was reassembled and back on set by 1 o'clock that afternoon, barely 12 hours after Pete's body was found beneath the Christmas tree. Roger Davis, the show's narrator, who had co-starred with Pete in the earlier TV movie The Young Country, was on holiday in Houston with his then-wife Jacqueline Smith. He was paged off an airplane, about to depart, and told the words that would change his career forever. "Pete has shot himself. You have to come back and replace him." Davis flew back to Los Angeles. The next morning, he was fitted into Pete Duel's costumes. By Monday, he was shooting Pete's scenes. Ben Murphy was destroyed. Studio publicist Alan Cohan said Murphy was comatose with grief at the mortuary and could not attend the funeral. Months later, Murphy told the National Enquirer what he really thought. Pete's body was hardly cold when they had an identical costume fitted out for Roger Davis. "The way the studio rubbed out any memory of Pete so fast really upset me. It's taught me the greatest lesson I'll ever learn about Hollywood." Pete appeared in the first 33 episodes. Davis played Hannibal Hayes for the final 17. Fans never accepted the switch. The show was canceled in January 1973, and by its final weeks it ranked dead last in the Nielsen ratings with a 9.6 rating and a 16 share. Remember the kid from Penfield who nearly became a doctor? Remember the 5-year deadline, the windshield crash, the medication that may have rewired his brain before Hollywood ever got the chance to break his spirit? 50 years after Pete Duel died beneath a Christmas tree, Quentin Tarantino watched the old footage and saw something the world had missed. He saw the template for a story about a television actor drowning in self-doubt, self-medicating a mood disorder nobody understood, watching himself on screen and hating what he saw. Tarantino used Pete's story as the blueprint for Leonardo DiCaprio's Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The actor the industry forgot became the ghost haunting one of the biggest films of the decade. Sally Field said it simply, "I loved Pete. I loved him, loved him, loved him. He was a tremendously gifted actor. I never knew how troubled he was." Ben Murphy, asked decades later what he would say if he could speak to Pete one more time, imagined an endless conversation. He would ask, "Petey, what were you thinking?" And Pete would shrug with that impish grin and say, "I goofed up." Then he would add the words that cut deepest of all, "And I'm not so sure I wouldn't do it again." If this story hit you in a place you weren't expecting, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another legend who deserved to be remembered.